The tip this week was requested by someone who had read an earlier entry in my blog about doing one-row stripes on straight needles. And she asked if there was a way to do one-row stripes on circular needles. And as it turns out, there is, and it happens to be the topic of the upcoming Stitch Anatomy lesson, which is written by Leslie Gonzalez. And so since it's fresh in my mind, I decided to do a video. Now you can use this technique on many different colors, and or you can use it on just two, as I have here. And what it does is it's called helix knitting, and it gives a barbershop effect. When you work in circular knitting, you don't knit to the end and then turn. You work around and it stripes up. And that's the reason why if you do stripes or you do Fair Isle in the round, there's a jog at the beginning and the end of the row where one row meets, the end of one row meets the beginning of another. This avoids the jog. Now, by the way, if you're doing two-row stripes, you can do a jogless join, and that works. But if you want to do one-row stripes, this technique works best. Now, you can do it, as I said, with one or many different colors. It just depends on how much yarn management you want to do, because for every striped row that you have, you need to have a separate ball of yarn, and that's one reason why I'm doing two here. I didn't feel like having three. Now, how you start this technique is you figure out how many stitches you've got. Let's say I've got 60 stitches. You divide it by the number of colors that you are going to be using. And if you're using two, then that's 30 stitches. If it's three, it's 20. If it's six, it's 10. And you use markers. Sorry, I keep clearing my throat. I have a cold. You use markers, or if you're using double-pointed needles like I am, you keep each color on a separate needle. Now, doing it with just two colors is fairly simple. What I did is I cast on half of my stitches with one color, half of my stitches with the other, and then I started working my first row. And in this technique, you work up to, let's say I worked my first round in blue. I work up until I get to where my working yarn in white is, and then I stop. And I pick up the new color. Now, right now, I have two yarn tails here. My last row was a blue row, and the row below it is a cream row. I've just finished knitting with the blue. So what I do is I pick up the cream and I knit with it. Now, one thing that you want to be careful to do is not pull too hard on this, because if you pull too hard on this, all it's going to do is draw the yarn from the previous row. So I'm going to try and maintain my loose tension for that first couple of stitches. Now, if I were doing this with multiple colors of stripes, I would knit up to where my first working yarn is. And if I'm just doing two-row stripes, that's going to be all the way around. And I just, crap, I forgot I was using double-pointed needles. I'm just merrily knitting along here. I'll fix that in the next row. Now, one of the things that can be confusing about this technique, because you have working yarn for all of the colors that you're using, is if you put it down, you might forget which was the color you were going to be using next. And so you want to make a note or leave it as I left it when I pick this up, where I have my working yarn. And then you can clearly see, oh, I finished a blue stripe, now I'm doing a white stripe. But if you leave it in the middle, sometimes it can be hard to tell. You might pick up the wrong end and start working. Okay, now I'm to where I've gone completely around, and here's my working yarn again. And there's my needle on the ground. Hold on, sorry for that. Okay, and this time my last row is a white row. And so I pick up the blue row and I just start knitting with it. Again, taking care that I don't pull too tightly. Because if you pull too tightly, you're going to have some problems. Now, let's look on the inside of this, now that I've totally screwed up my needles. And notice that I don't have any yarn tails, and the yarn just goes from one spot to another. And so it's a very easy way to do yarn tails, to do single color rows where you won't have joins and you won't have jogs. But you can see, if you notice, here's my blue going there, and there's a white below it, my white and blue, that you can see that it is kind of a barbershop effect.